I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA slapped a notice of closure sticker on my smoker while the HOA president smiled and the cops watched. And her reason? She says I gave her food poisoning, which was a flat-out lie. Funny thing is, the only thing poisoned that day was the truth. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm a chef, not the kind you see on television screaming about risotto. I'm the kind who understands that fire, meat, and time can create something honest. In my professional life, I run a tight kitchen in a downtown restaurant. In my personal life, I'm a backyard pitmaster. My custom-built offset smoker, a 1,500 pounds monster of welded steel I call the Beast, is my sanctuary. It sits in the corner of my yard in Silverstone Gardens, a neighborhood that values perfect lawns more than it values perfect brisket. Neighbors joked my yard was the best barbecue restaurant in town, but it was still my backyard. Permits, logs, and all. Our homeowners association, run by a woman named Helen Croft, treats a blade of grass over 2 inches tall like a felony. My smoker, with its gentle plumes of hickory and oak smoke, drove her insane. She saw it as a smudge on her perfect, beige-colored world. I saw it as my art. I followed every rule, got every small batch permit the county required, and kept my operation cleaner than a surgeon's table. But I knew sooner or later, she would come for me. I just never imagined how low she'd be willing to go. It happened the Friday before Labor Day weekend. This was my Super Bowl. I had briskets, pork butts, and racks of ribs resting in the Beast, slow cooking over coals I'd been tending since before dawn. The air in my yard was thick with the smell of rendered fat, complex spices, and sweetwood smoke, a smell that makes good people hungry and bad people jealous. My stainless steel prep tables were wiped down with sanitizer. My temperature probes were calibrated, and my service station was ready. Orders were pouring in. My neighbors, the good ones anyway, loved my barbecue. It was a weekend tradition. I was checking the internal temperature of a brisket. It was just hitting that perfect 203-degree mark where the collagen breaks down into liquid gold when I saw the van. A sterile, white county vehicle pulling up to my curb. My stomach tightened. 2 officials got out. 2 patrol cars rolled in behind them. 2 officers stepped out, hands on their belts. For safety, they said. Later, I learned Helen had asked for them. She'd emailed 4 safety presets when she filed the complaints. One was a man in a crisp polo shirt with a health department logo stitched on it. The other wore the uniform of the fire marshal. I knew them both vaguely. The health inspector was Mr. Jennings. The fire marshal was Captain Vargas. They weren't smiling. And standing on her perfectly manicured lawn across the street, watching the whole scene with an unnerving stillness, was Helen Croft. She held a pair of pruning shears like a scepter, a faint, tight smile on her lips. Helen favored blinding white power suits, platinum bleached hair, and makeup loud enough to boss a room. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the fence. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice steady. I'm not a man who gets rattled easily. Hot-headed, yes, but not rattled. Something I can help you with. Mr. Jennings looked uncomfortable. He was a fair man, I'd always thought, by the book. "Ethan," he began, avoiding my eyes. "We've had a complaint. 2, actually. Captain Vargas, a practical guy who had once complimented my smoker's construction, just folded his arms and looked grim. What kind of complaint?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The air suddenly felt cold despite the summer heat. "Food poisoning," Jennings said, finally looking at me. 2 separate households reported severe gastrointestinal distress after eating food from your last cookout. I felt a surge of hot anger. It was a clean, pure rage. It was the anger of a craftsman whose work has just been called garbage. "That's impossible," I said, my voice low and hard. "Every piece of meat I serve is cooked to a precise temperature and held there. My process is flawless." Across the street, Helen was pretending to snip a rose bush, but her eyes were locked on us. She was drinking this in. Jennings sighed. "Look, Ethan, I'm just here to follow procedure. 2 credible complaints trigger a mandatory shutdown pending a full investigation." The word shutdown hung in the air. It was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. "Shutdown? You can't be serious. I have 300 pounds of meat in there. I have orders for half the neighborhood. This is Labor Day weekend." Captain Vargas spoke up, his voice flat. "The health order trumps everything, Ethan. We have to secure the premises." "Secure the premises," My backyard. My backyard, where the swing set sat. It sounded like a crime scene. I wanted to scream. I wanted to point across the street and tell them to go investigate the real poison, the real sickness in this neighborhood. But I'm a professional. I held it in. The fury cooled into something harder, something colder. Resolve. Okay, I said, my voice quiet. What do you need? They walked into my yard. I watched them inspect my setup, my clean tables, my sanitation buckets. Jennings's face showed nothing but reluctant procedure. Then he pulled out a large, ugly, rectangular sticker. It was bright red. He walked over to the beast, my pride and joy, and slapped it right on the main cooking chamber door. The officers stayed by the gate. They didn't touch a thing. The shutdown was a health order, not an arrest. The sticker said in big black letters, "Closed by order of the county health department." A sharp pop came from the firebox. A drip of hot fat hit the coals, and a sheet of flame licked up the stack. I moved on instinct, cut the intake, dropped the lid, and slid a catch pan under the grate. Steam hissed. The flame folded. Captain Vargas checked the tag on my extinguisher, then the distance to the fence. "Textbook," he said. One officer flinched. The other tried not to smile. I read out the chamber temp, 225, and logged the minute. Jennings watched the smoke thin back to blue, scribbling in his book, while across the street, Helen raised her phone like a gavel. The smell of perfectly cooked brisket, a smell that had always meant joy and community to me, now smelled like failure and humiliation. I looked across the street. Helen Croft was gone from her yard, but I could feel her watching from her window, savoring her victory. This wasn't just a shutdown. This was a declaration of war. And she had no idea who she just picked a fight with. The first rule of being a chef is control your environment. My kitchen is my domain. The second rule is documentation. Trust nothing. Log everything. After Jennings and Vargas left, leaving that blood-red sticker on my smoker like a fatal wound, I didn't panic. I didn't yell. I channeled my rage into process. I went inside to my small home office, the place where I keep the business side of my passion organized. The two officials had agreed to come back in an hour to review my records, a small courtesy Mr. Jennings offered, probably because he could see the professionalism in my setup and the fury in my eyes. I used that hour to prepare my defense. I wasn't just a guy with a grill. I was a small business, and I ran it like one. I pulled out a heavy binder. On the front, I'd labeled it The Beast, Operations Bible. Inside was every permit, every certification, every piece of paper that proved I was legitimate. My food handler's license from the state, my county permit for small batch direct-to-consumer food sales, my business registration. I laid them out on my dining room table in a neat, overlapping row. Next came the logs. Any good pitmaster knows that barbecue is a science of temperature and time. I had a digital multi-probe thermometer that monitored the smoker's ambient temperature and the internal temperature of up to 4 different cuts of meat simultaneously. Every 30 minutes, that data was automatically logged on a spreadsheet on my laptop. I printed the logs from the cookout in question. The graph was a thing of beauty. You could see the brisket slowly climbing, then hitting the stall around 160 degrees, then pushing through to a perfect 203 degrees. You could see the pork butts following the same glorious curve. More importantly, you could see the holding temperature. After cooking, all the meat was held in a commercial-grade food warmer, which I also monitored. The log showed it never dropped below 145 degrees Fahrenheit, well above the 140 degrees danger zone. Sickness from my food wasn't just unlikely. It was a scientific impossibility. I printed out the graphs and placed them next to the permits. Then came sanitation. I had receipts for boxes of nitrile gloves, for the food-grade sanitizer I used on my tables, for the heavy-duty foil and butcher paper I used to wrap the meat. I even had a small camera mounted on my back porch. I pulled the footage from that day. I fast-forwarded through it, watching myself work. I looked like a surgeon, wiping down surfaces, changing gloves between handling raw meat and cooked meat, using separate color-coded cutting boards. It was a clinic in food safety. I set the laptop up at the end of the table, the video queued up and ready to play. My kitchen, visible from the dining room, was spotless. The sinks were gleaming. The floor was mopped. This wasn't just a defense. It was a statement. It was my entire professional ethos on display. When the doorbell rang, I was ready. I felt like a lawyer about to present his closing argument. I was Ethan Cole, and this was my evidence. I was fair. I was professional, and I was right. I believed the system, the rules, would see that. I believed that truth was enough. I was about to learn how wrong I was. When I opened the door, Mr. Jennings and Captain Vargas looked tense. I led them to the dining room table. Here it is, I said, my voice flat. My entire operation. I walked them through it. The permits, the temperature logs, explaining what each curve and number meant. I pointed to the holding temperature data. Nothing survives that, I said. No bacteria, no pathogens, nothing. I showed them the receipts for my sanitation supplies. I played the video of me working. I could see Mr. Jennings was impressed. He picked up one of the log sheets, studying it. This is meticulous, Mr. Cole, he admitted. More detailed than half the restaurants I inspect. Captain Vargas nodded. No fire code issues here. The smoker is a safe distance from the house. You have an extinguisher. The fuel is stored properly. From my perspective, you're clean. I felt a flicker of hope. They saw the truth. They had to. So, you'll take the sticker off? I asked. Jennings put the paper down and sighed, a deep, weary sound. That's when I knew. I can't, he said. Ethan, I believe you. I look at this and I see a professional. But the rules are the rules. 2 official, notarized complaints have been filed. Until those complaints are either withdrawn or proven false through a lab analysis of the food, the shutdown order stands. My hands are tied. My hope vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Proven false. You mean I'm guilty until proven innocent? It's a public health matter, Jennings said, and he sounded genuinely apologetic. We have to assume the worst to protect the public. It's a procedural absolute. My professionalism, my logs, my evidence, it meant nothing. The word of 2 anonymous people I was certain were lying, carried more weight than all my documented proof. The system I had trusted, the rules I had meticulously followed, were being used to strangle me. Just then, I glanced out the window. Walter Croft, Helen's husband, was walking his dog. He was a meek, nervous man who always seemed to be apologizing for taking up space. He saw me looking at him, and his eyes widened in panic. He quickly looked away, practically dragging his little dog across the street. He knew. He knew this was a setup, and he was terrified. I turned back to Jennings. This is a lie. This is a targeted attack, and you're letting it happen. He shook his head. My job isn't to figure out neighborhood disputes. It's to enforce the health code. The order stands. He left his card on the table. Get the leftovers from that batch tested at a certified lab. If they come back clean, it will help your case. They left. I stood there in my silent house, the dining table covered in proof of my innocence. It was all useless. I looked at that red sticker on my smoker. It wasn't just a sticker anymore. It was a brand. And I realized this fight wouldn't be won with temperature logs and permits. This would be a different kind of war. The first casualty of a lie is the truth. The second is your reputation. By 5 o'clock that evening, a local news van was parked on my street. A reporter with perfect hair and a microphone was standing on my lawn in front of my house, using my azalea bushes as a backdrop. My home, my private space, was now a set piece for a 20-second story about public endangerment. I watched through the blinds as she did her stand-up, her voice filled with a practiced, serious tone. A popular backyard barbecue operation in the quiet Silverstone Gardens neighborhood has been shut down by county officials today. The camera zoomed in on the red sticker on my smoker. It looked obscene on television, a splash of official condemnation broadcast to the entire city. When the story aired at 6, the cheering at the bottom of the screen read, "Sickness claims halt unlicensed food business." Unlicensed? The word hit me like a punch. Off camera, Mr. Jennings told the reporter my permits were current. The station cut that line for time. Restaurant chef is my day job. The backyard cook has its own home kitchen permits. I had just shown my licenses to 2 county officials. But the lie was easier. It was snappier. And now it was the official story. The reporter knocked for a quote. Before I could speak, a neighbor shouted from the sidewalk, "Poison brisket." Phones were up. I walked out with my permits in a clear sleeve. "On the record," I said, holding them to the camera. "State license, county permit, temperature logs. All real." A white SUV rolled by slow, Helen at the wheel, filming from the window. A patrol car did a crawl, lights off, just watching. I kept my hands still and my voice flat. "You can run this, too," I told the reporter, so folks hear both sides. She glanced at my papers, then at the red sticker. The crowd murmured. I went back inside and started printing extra copies for whoever wanted the truth. My phone started buzzing and didn't stop. The neighborhood text chain, which was usually full of messages about lost dogs and garage sales, exploded. The community split right down the middle, like a fault line had opened up on our street. Messages of support poured in from my regulars. Ethan, this is insane. We know you're clean. Don't let them get you down. Your brisket is the best. But then came the other messages, the whispers of doubt. I always wondered if that was safe. So much smoke. You knew something had to be wrong. Thank goodness the HOA is on top of things. I felt like I was watching my own social autopsy. People I'd known for years, people I'd shared a beer with, were now looking at me with suspicion. I saw them through my window, gathering in small clusters on the sidewalk, pointing at my house, shaking their heads. I was no longer Ethan, their neighbor. I was the barbecue bus guy. I was a menace. And then, at 7:15 p.m., the kill shot arrived. An email sent to every single resident of Silverstone Gardens. The sender was Helen Croft, president. The subject line was crafted for maximum fear, an urgent public health and safety warning. It was a masterclass in character assassination. It never mentioned my name once, but it didn't have to. It spoke of the inherent risks of unregulated commercial enterprises operating in our residential areas. It mentioned recent disturbing reports and the HOA's commitment to proactive measures to protect our families and our property values. It was slick, corporate, and dripping with fabricated concern. It was a public stoning, and she had handed every resident a rock. She was using the power they gave her to protect the community to instead destroy a member of it. The email ended with a call to remain vigilant. It was a call to treat me like a threat. I sat there in the dark, the glow of my phone illuminating my face. The rage from the morning was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. This was calculated. This was premeditated. This was not about smoke or zoning. This was about power. She wanted to eliminate me, to make an example of me. I deleted the email, stood up, and grabbed my keys. There was only one person I could talk to, Isabella Serrano. She was one of my best customers, a brisket and ribs loyalist, and one of the sharpest defense lawyers in the city. They said she could cross-examine a stone and make it weep. We had a complicated history, a sort of on-again, off-again thing that never quite became official, but was built on a foundation of mutual respect and good whiskey. I found her at a dark, quiet bar downtown, the kind of place where secrets felt safe. She was already there, a glass of bourbon in her hand, like she'd been expecting me. I told her everything. I told her about the shutdown, the news report, the email. She listened without interrupting, her dark eyes fixed on mine. When I was finished, she took a long, slow sip of her drink. She slid the glass to the center of the table and looked at me, her expression hard as granite. She's good, Isabella said, her voice a low purr. She didn't just come at you with a complaint. She built a narrative. Health, safety, property values. She made you the villain in a story she wrote herself. She leaned forward. This is a smear campaign, Ethan. A textbook case. She's not just trying to shut down your smoker. She's trying to burn your whole life to the ground. She took another sip. So, are we going to let her? A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. She made one critical error. She thinks she's just fighting a guy with a hobby. She's about to find out she's fighting a professional chef. And a chef, Ethan, is all about process, evidence, and heat. We are going to build a case so tight, so documented, so scorching hot, it will melt her down to the studs. Isabella's office wasn't what I expected. It was less a lawyer's den and more a battle command center. Instead of dusty law books, one entire wall was a massive, gleaming white magnetic board. This, she explained, was where they built their cases. Most lawyers use timelines, she said, tossing me a marker. We're going to build a menu, an anatomy of a crime, from appetizer to dessert. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of my old self. This was a language I understood. I grabbed the marker. Let's prep the case, I said. She grinned. I call it mise en place for justice. Everything in its place. We started with what we knew. The center of the board was the day of the alleged poisoning. I wrote the date in big black letters. Underneath, I listed every customer who bought food that day. I had their names and the exact times of their purchases from my credit card logs. Isabella had already cross-referenced them with the HOA directory. We knew who they were, where they lived. We pinned their names to the board. Then we built my side of the story. It was the easy part because it was the truth. I tacked up the printed temperature logs from the beast, the clear, beautiful graphs showing a perfectly executed cook. Next to it, I posted the log from the food warmer, proving the holding temperature never wavered. Isabella whistled. If I ever get tired of lawyering, I might have a job for you, I grumbled. She just smirked. Stick to brisket, chef. I added my receipts. The one from my butcher, a trusted local guy who provides prime-grade cuts. The receipts for the pecan and hickory wood. The receipts for my gloves, my sanitizer, my foil. Each one was a brick in the wall of my defense. Then came my own security footage. I had it on a tablet. We watched the key moments. Me, gloved and meticulous, serving food. The clean, orderly station. It showed every customer, every transaction. Okay, Isabella said, stepping back to look at the board. Your side is locked down. It's a fortress of facts. Now for the other side. She wrote 2 names on the board in red marker. John Smith and Jane Doe. These were the pseudonyms for the 2 complainants whose identities she was already working to get formally released through a discovery request. These are our villains, she said, tapping their names. Right now, they are ghosts. We need to make them real. We need to know everything they did that day, who they talked to, where they went, what they ate. This was the part where my frustration turned into something else. It was a cold, focused energy. My entire career was built on the principle of taking responsibility for what you serve. It's a sacred trust between a cook and a customer. These people, and the woman pulling their strings, had violated that trust. They had used the very idea of it as a weapon. When I cook for someone, I said, my voice low, I'm making a promise. A promise that it's safe, that it's good, that I cared. Helen is counting on the fact that nobody documents that promise. But I do. I looked at the board, at the solid wall of my evidence, and the 2 red names floating in a sea of blank space. It was a map of the battlefield. We had secured our own territory. Now we had to venture into hers. Isabella looked at the board, her finger tracing the empty space around the red names. The official investigation will take weeks, maybe months. The county lab is backed up. We can't wait that long. The lie will set in. We need our own proof, and we need it now. She pulled out her phone. I'm hiring a private lab. It's expensive, but we need speed. I nodded. I have everything. That night, I had packed and frozen vacuum-sealed samples of every single thing I'd served. Brisket, pulled pork, ribs, sausage. It was standard practice for me, a way to quality check my own work later. I never imagined I'd be using it as forensic evidence. The next morning, a courier picked up the frozen, labeled packages. Now, all we could do was wait. The 2 days it took to get the results were the longest of my life. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Every time I looked out the window, I saw the red sticker on my smoker. It was a constant, screaming reminder of the injustice. Helen Croft would occasionally walk her dog past my house, a smug, satisfied little smirk on her face. She thought she had won. She thought I was just sitting here, defeated. She had no idea I was building an arsenal. The call from Isabella came on a Wednesday afternoon. I answered on the first ring. Talk to me, I said. Ethan, the lab report is in. She paused for dramatic effect. She loved this part of the job. Are you sitting down? Because this isn't just a home run. This is a grand slam. She read from the report. Total coliform count, negligible. E. coli 0. Salmonella, 0. Listeria, 0. She continued, her voice gaining momentum. And here's the beautiful part. The lab ran a thermophilic spore count. It's a way to tell if cooked food has been held at the proper temperature. Your scores were so low, the lab director said he's never seen anything like it outside of a sterile canning facility. He called your process bacteriologically perfect. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 5 days. I was innocent, and now I had the science to prove it. The next day, as if on cue, the official report from the county lab came in. It confirmed everything. Mr. Jennings called me himself. His voice was full of relief and professional respect. Mr. Cole, your food is 100% cleared. In fact, your sample was the cleanest we've tested all year. I'm personally submitting this report to have the order lifted. For a moment, I felt a wave of elation. It was over. But Jennings wasn't finished. There's a but. Ethan, he said, and my stomach dropped. The order isn't officially lifted until the paperwork is processed, which could take a few days. And the original complaints have not been withdrawn. As long as those sworn statements exist, this investigation technically remains open. It's a bureaucratic catch, 22. So, I was innocent, but I was still being punished. My name was cleared, but my business was still closed. The system was a swamp. That night, the local news ran a follow-up. The reporter with the same serious face stood on my lawn again. An update on the Silverstone Gardens barbecue bust, she said. Lab tests have cleared the food itself, leaving health officials baffled as to the source of the mysterious illnesses. The story wasn't local chef vindicated. It was mystery illness baffles officials. They even had a quote from Helen Croft, who had clearly been waiting for their call. She twisted my victory into a new weapon. We are all so relieved that the source of the illness was not from right here in our neighborhood, she said, her face a mask of fake sincerity. But this incident highlights the very real dangers of unregulated businesses. We must remain vigilant to protect our community's character and safety. She was using my innocence as proof that a vague, invisible threat still existed, a threat only she could protect them from. I was staring at the TV, my fist clenched. I had the truth. I had the science. But it wasn't enough. She was still winning the war of perception. Isabella's voice on the phone later that night was grim and determined. She's not giving up. This was never about the food. It was about destroying you. Well, the science part is over. Now comes the fun part. We proved you're innocent. Now we prove she's a criminal. The hunt began. Isabella, using the power of a subpoena that came with the civil suit she was preparing to file, finally got the names of the two complainants. John Smith and Jane Doe were now Frank Gibson and Cynthia Perry. Two names, two real people who lived just a few blocks away. Now we build their timeline, Isabella said, her eyes gleaming. We were back in her office, standing in front of the giant whiteboard. She wrote their real names in red marker. Our first move was a long shot. Isabella drafted a polite but firm request for voluntary production, sent to the half-dozen neighbors who lived around Gibson, Perry, and Helen Croft. It asked for any security or doorbell camera footage from the night of the alleged poisonings. Most will say no, she warned. But sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you find a neighbor who hates the HOA president more than they value their privacy. She was right. We got lucky. We got neighbor Leo. Leo was a retired software engineer who treated his home security system like it was NORAD. He had 8 high-definition cameras covering every conceivable angle of his property and the street beyond. He hated Helen Croft with a fiery passion after she tried to fine him for having a non-regulation garden gnome. He sent us everything. We spent hours scrolling through the footage, a tedious marathon of cars passing and squirrels running. And then we found it. At 10:14 p.m. on the night in question, a pristine white SUV I recognized instantly pulls to the curb in front of Leo's house. Helen Croft's car. A man gets out of the passenger side. It's Frank Gibson. The camera is just far enough away that you can't see their faces perfectly, but it's clear enough. Helen leans over, and you can see her hand pass a thick, white, business-sized envelope to him through the window. He takes it, gives a little nod, and gets out of the car. It was a cash drop. Later, the ledger showed 2 $500 resident assistance cash pulls that week. It had to be. My heart was pounding. We had her. But Isabella wasn't done. One down, one to go, she said, her focus absolute. We moved on to the footage from a camera near Cynthia Perry's house. This one was aimed across the street at a small strip mall. It was grainy, but it was enough. At 8:32 p.m., just about an hour after she would have eaten my barbecue, Cynthia Perry's car is clearly visible in the parking lot. We watched as she walked out of a restaurant carrying a large takeout bag. The sign on the restaurant was lit up and clear as day, Sakura Sushi. I looked at Isabella. Sushi. She claimed she got food poisoning from my fully cooked pork and then went out for raw fish. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It gets better, Isabella said. She'd already sent her private investigator, a former cop named Gus, to the strip mall. Gus was a guy who knew that the most valuable evidence is often found in the trash. He'd gone through the sushi restaurant's dumpster from that night, and buried under a pile of fish heads and empty soy sauce packets, he found it. A credit card receipt. The name on it, Cynthia Perry. The order, 1 spicy tuna volcano roll, one rainbow roll, and a dynamite roll, all containing raw or undercooked seafood, a classic source for the exact symptoms she'd claimed to have. We stood in front of the whiteboard. Isabella pinned up the still frame of Helen handing Gibson the envelope. She pinned up the picture of Perry leaving the sushi place. She pinned up a photo of the credit card receipt. The blank spaces on the board were gone. It was no longer my timeline versus a void. It was my meticulous, documented truth versus their dirty, detailed, undeniable lie. The timeline was perfect. The cookout, the sushi dinner, the late-night cash payment. It was a conspiracy laid bare in time-stamped images and receipts. I felt a wave of pure, cold fury wash over me. It was one thing to be accused. It was another thing entirely to see the architecture of the frame they built for you. The casual evil of it, the cheapness of their loyalty bought with an envelope of cash. She didn't just lie, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She planned it. She paid for it. She built it piece by piece. Isabella looked at the board, then at me. Her smile was terrifying. Yes, she did, she said. And we're going to use our own materials to bury her under it. Get some rest, Ethan. Tomorrow, we go to court for an emergency injunction. It's time to stop playing defense. The courtroom for the injunction hearing was small, cold, and smelled of old paper and stale coffee. It was the opposite of my backyard. No life, no warmth, just beige walls and fluorescent lights. I sat next to Isabella, wearing a suit that felt like a straitjacket. Across the aisle sat Helen Croft, looking severe and self-righteous in a navy blue blazer. Her lawyer was a slick, silver-haired man who looked like he'd been grown in a lab to represent smug HOA boards. Helen refused to look at me, staring straight ahead at the judge's bench as if she were single-handedly upholding the moral fabric of the universe. The judge was a woman named Elena Ramirez, known for her sharp mind and her complete lack of patience for nonsense. Isabella had told me, she's tough, but she's fair. All she cares about are the facts. That was all I wanted. Isabella stood up. She didn't come out swinging. Her approach was quiet, methodical, almost gentle. She wasn't trying to win the whole case today. She was just trying to stop the bleeding. She presented the judge with the lab reports, both ours and the county's. She laid out my temperature logs. She presented my permits. Your Honor, she said, her voice calm and respectful. My client's business has been shut down for over a week based on 2 complaints. We now have definitive scientific evidence from 2 separate labs, including the county's own, that Mr. Cole's food was not only safe, but exemplary. There is no longer any public health basis for this shutdown. Every day it continues. It causes irreparable financial and reputational harm to my client. Helen's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, the investigation is ongoing. The fact that the food tested clean does not explain why 2 residents became violently ill. The HOA supports the county's caution in protecting the health of our community. He made it sound so reasonable. Judge Ramirez looked over her glasses at him. Counselor, are you a scientist? Do you have any evidence at all, other than 2 uncorroborated statements, to suggest this man's food was the cause? The lawyer stammered. No, Your Honor, but... The judge cut him off. Then I have a problem. I'm looking at scientific fact on one hand and unsubstantiated claims on the other. She looked at the file for a long moment. We held our breath. The court grants a partial injunction, she declared. Mr. Cole, you may resume operations on a limited, provisional basis. Pre-orders and prepayments only. No on-site, walk-up sales. This will limit traffic while the county concludes its full investigation. The shutdown is stayed. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a victory. The red sticker could come down. Jennings nodded on my call. Go ahead and peel it, Ethan. The injunction stays it. I could fire up the beast again. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I looked at Helen. Her face was a thundercloud of fury. She had lost the first battle. That evening, as I was peeling the red sticker off my smoker, it left a sticky, ugly residue. I climbed a step stool and clipped a white banner across the top of my garage doors, still open by court order. PRE orders only. No walk UPS. Limited hours. Just like the judge said. Another email from the HOA landed in my inbox. Helen was already spinning the narrative. Subject, important update on Silverstone legal matters. She framed the judge's ruling not as a victory for me, but as a dangerous loophole. She wrote, Despite the HOA's ongoing efforts to prioritize resident safety, a judge has temporarily allowed the commercial operation to partially resume. Then she pivoted. The attack was no longer about food safety. It was a new front. This ruling does not address our primary concerns regarding inappropriate commercial traffic, zoning violations, and the disruption of our neighborhood's peaceful, residential character. Rest assured, the board will now pursue every available avenue to enforce our community's bylaws and protect our way of life. She was a cornered animal, and she was getting more vicious. 20 minutes later, headlights stacked along my curb. Helen staged a safety walk. Orange cones, clipboards, a squealy bullhorn under my garage banner. She tried to box my driveway for photos, calling the banner bait. A minivan braked, a scooter skidded. I stepped out, palm up, waved the van through, and nudged a cone aside with 2 fingers. Public street, I said. Don't touch those, she snapped. I hit record on my phone and read the injunction line by line. Neighbors drifted out. Leo with his camera, the mail carrier off duty, my butcher in an apron watching. Walter whispered, "Helen, let's go," eyes on the ground. A patrol car rolled by slow. The officer gave us the smallest shake of his head. "Keep it calm." Helen lifted the bullhorn. It died on a feedback squeal. I handed permits to anyone who asked. Pre-orders only. No walk-ups. This is what compliance looks like. The crowd thinned, bored of drama without fire. Helen scooped up her cones and hissed, "We'll elevate." I logged the time and went back to the pit. The next day, she proved it. I was in my yard seasoning a pork shoulder when she marched right up to my fence line in a blinding white power suit, platinum hair blazing, makeup loud. Walter trailed her, eyes down. She jabbed a letter with the HOA seal at me and hissed, "Close this now, or our council files a civil suit. Zoning, nuisance, damages." She leaned in. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a food court. I won't let you cheapen it." I didn't say anything. I just calmly continued rubbing salt and pepper into the meat. I looked up at her, my face a blank mask. I let her spew her poison. I let her think she was still in control, that this was a fight about bylaws and neighborhood character. I knew what she didn't. I knew we had the picture of the envelope. I knew we had the sushi receipt. She thought this was a fight about rules. She had no idea it was about to become a fight about evidence, about conspiracy, about crime. And I was going to let her walk right into the trap she had set for me. The discovery phase of a lawsuit is like gutting a fish. It's messy, it smells bad, but it's where you find out what's really inside. Isabella's lawsuit against the HOA and Helen Croft personally for defamation, tortious interference, and now civil conspiracy was officially filed. That meant we had the legal right to demand their records. All of them. A few weeks later, the boxes arrived at her office. 12 bankers' boxes full of HOA meeting minutes, financial statements, internal emails, and correspondence. It was a mountain of paper designed to intimidate and overwhelm. They were betting we wouldn't have the patience to go through it. They bet wrong. They didn't know they were dealing with a chef. My whole life is about sifting through details to find what matters. Isabella and I spent a weekend turning her conference room into a document review center. We had coffee, pizza, and a shared sense of mission. It was tedious work, pages and pages of boring complaints about lawn maintenance and holiday decoration violations. But I knew what I was looking for. I was looking for the money. In a kitchen, if you want to know where the problems are, you follow the waste. In a corrupt organization, you follow the money. I took the financial records. I went through ledger after ledger, my chef's eye for detail catching things a lawyer might miss. And then I found it. A budget line item labeled Community Outreach and Discretionary Fund. It sounded innocent, but the payments coming out of it were anything but. The descriptions were intentionally vague. Consulting services, promotional printing, resident support initiative. The amounts were always round numbers, $500, $1,000, $2,000, and many were listed as cash withdrawals. It was a slush fund hidden in plain sight. I kept digging, and then I hit gold. 2 cash withdrawals for $500 each, dated 2 days before my smoker was shut down. The memo line for both simply said, "Resident Assistance." I showed it to Isabella. Her eyes lit up. "That's the payoff money, Ethan. That's how she paid Gibson and Perry." It was the motive and the means, right there in the HOA's own books. But we still needed to prove intent. We found that in the boxes of electronic records, a hard drive containing drafts of emails and newsletters. Isabella's forensic tech went through the metadata, the digital fingerprint on every file. He found a file named draft-safety-warning.docs. It was the exact email Helen had sent out after my shutdown, the one about unregulated businesses and public health. We already had the email, but the metadata told a story the email didn't. It showed the file's creation date. It had been written and saved 3 full days before Gibson and Perry had even bought barbecue from me. She had the entire smear campaign drafted before the supposed incident even happened. It was a pre-written obituary for my business. It was premeditated. Isabella leaned back in her chair, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Conspiracy, she said softly. Fraud, misuse of HOA funds. We have it all. This is no longer a civil case about a barbecue pit. This is a case about a crime. The pressure was clearly mounting on the other side. A few days later, I was in the local grocery store picking up some vegetables when I saw Walter Croft in the same aisle. He looked awful. His face was pale, his eyes were sunken, and he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He saw me and froze like a deer in the headlights. I just nodded at him and tried to walk past, but he darted over, his movements quick and nervous. Ethan, he whispered, his voice hoarse. He wouldn't look me in the eye, staring instead at a pile of bell peppers. She's out of control. This has gone too far. I told her to stop. He looked around frantically, as if Helen might materialize out of thin air. It was only supposed to be a warning, just a little scare. He trailed off, then scurried away down the aisle without another word, leaving me standing there next to the avocados. It was a confession. A weak, pathetic confession, but a confession nonetheless. Isabella filed a new motion with the court that afternoon, a motion to compel, adding the evidence of the slush fund and the pre-written email. We attached the financial records showing the cash withdrawals. We attached the screenshot of the email's metadata with the creation date circled in red. We were putting all our cards on the table. The case was now about so much more than my smoker. It was about an elected official who used her neighbor's money to pay off other neighbors to lie, all to destroy one man's livelihood because she didn't like the smell of his hickory smoke. The court date was set. There would be no more maneuvering, no more emails, no more hiding behind procedure. It was time for the showdown. The main courtroom was nothing like the small hearing room. It was large and imposing, with dark wood paneling and high ceilings that seemed to swallow sound. The air was thick with a heavy, formal silence. The jury, 9 ordinary people who had been chosen to decide the fate of my reputation, sat in their box, their faces a mixture of curiosity and seriousness. This was it. The final act. Isabella was a different person in this arena. Her quiet, methodical planning had transformed into a sharp, focused intensity. She was in her element. Helen Croft sat at the opposing table, looking smaller and less confident than she did in the neighborhood. The power of her HOA presidency meant nothing here. Here, she was just a defendant. After days of testimony, of establishing the facts of my business and the timeline of events, the moment arrived. The plaintiff calls Helen Croft to the stand, Isabella announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Helen walked to the witness stand, her steps stiff. Her lawyer had clearly prepped her, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. Isabella approached the stand, not with aggression, but with a calm, almost surgical precision. She started with the timeline, using a huge magnetic board just like the one in her office so the jury could see it all laid out. She walked Helen through the dates. The day the smear email was written, the day the cash was withdrawn from the HOA's slush fund, the day of my cookout, the day the complaints were filed. With each question, the timeline grew tighter, more damning. Helen's answers were clipped and evasive. I don't recall. That's not how I would characterize it. It's all circumstantial. Then Isabella changed gears. Mrs. Croft, you testified that you were concerned for the well-being of your neighbors, Frank Gibson and Cynthia Perry. Correct? Yes, of course, Helen said, a bit of her old self-righteousness returning. They were very ill. So ill, in fact, that you felt the need to give Mr. Gibson $500 in cash from the HOA's Community Outreach Fund? Isabella asked, her voice still even. Helen's face went pale. I was helping a resident in financial distress. It was an act of charity. A charitable act you performed in your car at night on a dark street corner? Isabella asked. Before Helen could answer, Isabella said, Permission to play Plaintiff's Exhibit 22. Your Honor. The judge nodded. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. It was the grainy doorbell camera footage, the white SUV, the envelope. The jury was mesmerized. You could see Helen's lawyer sink a little in his chair. And Cynthia Perry, Isabella continued, not missing a beat. You were concerned for her as well? Deeply, Helen said, her voice thin. Permission to play Exhibit 23. This time it was the footage of Cynthia Perry, takeout bag in hand, walking out of Sakura Sushi. Isabella then had an evidence bag brought forward. Inside was the credit card receipt. She put it on the projector, the name, the date, the order of raw fish. It was all there for the jury to see. A low murmur went through the courtroom. Helen was visibly shaking now. She was trapped. And then Isabella delivered the final, brutal blow. She had gotten the text messages, the ones between Helen, Gibson, and Perry. The judge had ruled them admissible. Isabella projected them onto the screen. Helen, the story is food poisoning from the barbecue. Stick to it. Money on delivery of your signed complaint. Gibson, got it. Perry, K, when do we get paid? It was all there. The conspiracy in their own words. The plan, the payment, the lies. It was undeniable. Helen shot to her feet. They begged me for help, she blurted. The room froze. Judge Ramirez's gavel cracked. Sit down, Miss Croft. One more outburst, and you will be removed. A bailiff took a step forward. The jury leaned in, eyes on the screen. Helen's lawyer asked for a sidebar. Denied. Isabella stayed cool. So, your charity came with scripts, payments, and timing that matched the cash pulls. Correct. Helen's mouth opened, then closed. Silence. The only sound was the hum of the projector and the judge's pen, tapping once, like a period at the end of a sentence. Helen stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Her carefully constructed world of rules and regulations and feigned concern had just been obliterated by the raw, ugly truth. The judge, a woman who had seen everything, looked at Helen Croft with a level of contempt that was colder than any anger. In light of this evidence, Judge Ramirez said, her voice like cracking ice, this court finds that there is no issue of material fact for the jury to dispute regarding the claims of fraud, defamation, and conspiracy. She issued a directed verdict, a rare move that essentially ends the trial. She found in my favor on all counts. She ordered the HOA's insurance to pay for all my financial losses. She ordered Helen Croft to personally pay me punitive damages for her malicious conduct. She ordered them to pay every cent of Isabella's legal fees. She formally struck down the HOA rules Helen had tried to invent to shut me down. And then she added one last thing, the part that mattered most to me. Furthermore, she declared, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom and landing on Helen. As a condition of this judgment, Ms. Croft will issue a full, public retraction and apology. She will read it aloud at the next Homeowners Association meeting, admitting to the fabrication of claims, the misuse of community funds, and the deliberate and malicious targeting of Mr. Cole. The judge then looked directly at me. Mr. Cole, your name is cleared. Your reputation is restored. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. It was over. I had won. But as I sat there, the silence of the courtroom ringing in my ears, I knew there was one final piece of justice that no court could order. It was something the community had to do for itself. A week later, on a bright, cloudless Saturday, the residents of Silverstone Gardens gathered at the community clubhouse. The mood was tense, awkward. It felt like a funeral. The emergency HOA meeting was called to order. Helen Croft, stripped of her power and her pride, walked to the podium. She looked like a ghost. Her husband, Walter, sat in the front row, staring at his hands. The PA system, which always screeched and popped, worked perfectly for the first time in memory. In a flat, robotic voice, Helen read the apology the court had written for her. She admitted to everything. The lies, the payments, the conspiracy. She admitted she made it all up because she didn't like my smoker. When she finished, there was no applause, no jeering, just a heavy, profound silence. She stepped down from the podium and walked out of the clubhouse, Walter trailing her like a shadow. Nobody said a word as they left. They just watched them go. The HOA board immediately nominated a new president, a reasonable woman named Mrs. Adler, who had always been kind to me. The healing had begun. After the meeting, The residents moved from the stuffy clubhouse out into the adjacent park. The smell of hickory smoke filled the air. I was standing at the beast, which was cleaned and polished and shining in the sun. The ugly residue from the red sticker was gone, replaced by a new, custom-made magnetic sign. It had my logo and 4 simple words: Ethan's Barbecue. Good food. Good neighbors. Today, the food was free. This cookout wasn't for profit. It was for restoration. It was an offering to a community that had been fractured by suspicion and lies. The line was long. My loyal customers were there first, patting me on the back. Neighbor Leo, the tech geek whose camera had broken the case open, got the first plate of brisket, on the house for life. Then came the others. The neighbors who had doubted me, the ones who had whispered on the sidewalk, now came forward, their faces a mixture of shame and hunger. I just smiled and served them a plate. No judgment. The food was the apology. The food was the handshake. I looked up and saw 2 familiar figures walking toward me, not in uniform, but in shorts and t-shirts. It was Mr. Jennings, the health inspector, and Captain Vargas, the fire marshal. They came with their families. Jennings walked up, shook my hand firmly, and said, "I've been a health inspector for 20 years, Ethan. I've never been happier to be wrong about a situation. This plate of brisket is the best-smelling violation I've never had to write up." We both laughed. He was a good man trapped in a bad system. And in that moment, we were just 2 guys in a park about to enjoy some barbecue. The new HOA president, Mrs. Adler, came over holding a paper plate piled high with ribs. "Ethan," she said, "the board and I are drafting a new set of bylaws for home-based businesses. We want to create clear, fair rules that support residents, not punish them. We were wondering if you would be willing to consult." I looked at her and smiled. I'd be honored. I took a step back and just watched for a moment. I saw kids with sauce-smeared faces chasing each other on the grass. I saw neighbors who had been on opposite sides of the text chain, now sharing a picnic table, laughing. Isabella was there, leaning against a tree, a small, satisfied smile on her face as she ate. She caught my eye and gave me a nod, a look that said, "We did it." The whole ugly affair hadn't just been about me or my smoker or Helen's abuse of power. It had been a test of the neighborhood's character. We had failed it at first, but now we were passing. We were fixing what had been broken. We were taking a community that had been poisoned by bitterness, and we were making it whole again, one plate of barbecue at a time. I took a deep breath. The smoke smelled sweet. It didn't smell like defiance or anger anymore. It smelled like victory. It smelled like community.